Hi guys, and welcome to this week's bartenderhq.com podcast. This week we're going to be talking about the new alcohol advice that's been issued by the UK government. We're going to be talking about learning online and why 2016 is the best year to be a bartender. Now, the UK government has issued new advice to drinkers in the country on how much alcohol people should be consuming in any given week, sort of the maximums, and it's actually a reduction for the majority of people. So you've got 14 units a week is the new advice, and that is for men and women. Now, a unit of alcohol is kind of a UK thing. I'm not sure if it's used outside the UK at all, but 1 unit of alcohol is essentially 25 millilitres of a spirit that is 40% ABV, if that makes sense. So the UK shot size is 25 mils, so just under the 1 ounce that you'd normally have in a lot of places around the world, or 30 millilitres. So it's 25 mils at 40% ABV. That is what is classed as a single unit of alcohol here in the UK. Now, they also list that a pint of normal strength lager is 2 units, but they note that normal strength is 3.5%. Now, I'll be honest, I don't remember the last time I've actually seen a 3.5% ABV lager or beer. I mean, I'm sure there's a few out there, but more often than not, your lower alcohol options in bars tend to be around the 4% point. So there's a Stella for Beck's Beer, that sort of thing, that are all quite popular in the UK. Your Carling and your Fosters are also 4 and 4.1% ABV. So that tends to be kind of the low end that most people will find in bars. So I'm not quite sure where they get this 3.5% thing from. Maybe it's a little bit historical, but maybe there are other beers out there that are around about that point. But it does seem that that's a bit of a strange choice. I think they've chosen 3.5% more to get the 2 units and a pint than actually to reflect what people are drinking. I think that might be a little bit of a mistake in terms of the way that they're actually letting people know about these new guidelines. So essentially, they've reduced the men's maximum intake that they recommend. To essentially what the ladies were on already, and they've kept the ladies the same. So, and the other thing that is a big kind of takeaway from this is that they are recommending people have several days that they don't drink any alcohol at all during a week, which is obviously it's a good idea as well. It breaks it from being a habit of having to have a drink before bed or whatever it is, however people are using the alcohol. But I mean, it is a very low amount. They also don't recommend that people save up their units and use them all in one night as a sort of binge drink kind of thing. So, what does this mean for bars? Should we be addressing how much alcohol is in any given drink, any given cocktail? Should there be maximum amounts of alcohol that can be served in one glass? Should there be... I don't know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, and if it's something that has come up in your bar. I mean, I know that responsible bars are not really serving more than a double in a glass. Anyway, I know that there are going to be some cocktails that end up with a little bit more than that, but in general, most bars won't serve a triple, certainly not quadruple drinks, and that sort of thing, which is kind of irresponsible. Obviously, the main licensing thing in the UK is that we're not supposed to make people drink more than they ordinarily would. So that is kind of, from a licensing point of view, that's not really affected by this. However, will you be addressing your cocktail menu and perhaps adding lower alcohol options, perhaps drinks that only contain maybe 25 mils of the spirit in order that people can enjoy a couple of drinks during a meal, or a couple of drinks while they're at your bar? I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that one. Of course, I'll link to the BBC article in the show notes, so if you want to click over to bartenderhq.com and check out our podcast section, you will be able to find the link to the original article right there. Now, in terms of new podcasts in the world of bars, as you'll probably know if you've been listening to this show for quite a while, I've been featured on a couple of other podcasts and had a couple of the podcasters from other shows on our show already. So the guys at barabove.com and the Mixology Talk podcast, that is Chris and Julia Tunstall, they featured on the show way back around about the 8th show that we did over a year ago now, and they do an awesome job. It's an every 2 weeks kind of podcast. Julia asks questions. Chris is a very, very experienced bartender, and Julia asks all the questions that we want to know the answers to. It's a brilliant show. They are so informative. Their cocktail classes that they have online already, their cocktail design course is absolutely stunning, and also all the ingredient knowledge. I mean, these guys put together their own bitters, their own tinctures, their own all sorts of stuff. Absolutely superb stuff. Chris is one of the most knowledgeable bartenders that I know, and you should definitely check out their podcast. If you search iTunes for Mixology Talk podcast, you will find them. There's also, of course, the Bartender Journey podcast. Now, that is Brian Weber, who has also featured on our podcast very much in the early days, before we were even doing the videos to go alongside it. So again, I would love to have Brian back on the show at some point in the future. Now, Brian works in New York. He is also heavily involved with Tales of the Cocktail. Now, if you've not heard of Tales of the Cocktail, it is the annual conference that goes on down in New Orleans. It is probably the biggest gathering of bartenders worldwide at any point throughout the year. So that's another event that I'm really going to try and make my way to at some point in the coming years. I don't think I'm going to make it next year, but perhaps 2017. We'll see what we can do. But he also runs a paid podcast for Tales 365. Tales 365 is a system that the guys have over there so that people that can't attend the conference in person can actually get access to a lot of the seminars and extra content throughout the year for a single payment or a subscription, I think, if you want to continue it. But check out the guys over at Tales of the Cocktail. That's an awesome event if you can possibly make it. Now, there has been a new podcast. Well, there's actually been 2 new podcasts since I started that I'm aware of. There could be others, and if you know of any bartending podcasts that I'm not aware of, please do let me know. The first one is the Schneider Show. Steve Schneider from Employees Only in New York. Now, I cannot wait. I'm going to be going to New York this year, as well as going to Las Vegas, so I will definitely be visiting Employees Only at some point, and hopefully Steve will be working that shift, and I'll be able to get him to make me a cocktail. If you've ever seen the movie Hey Bartender, now this was recommended to me by Brian from the Bartender Journey podcast, but you have got to see it if you can get hold of it. It's an awesome documentary about the bar scene, the craft bar scene, and how it contrasts with some of the other stuff. And there is a lot of footage in there as well, I believe, from Tales of the Cocktail with Dale DeGroff, and basically every legend of bartending is pretty much there. Now, Steve Schneider has a huge background. He was a Marine in the US Marines. I believe he got injured in New York. He was assaulted and had some injuries, and glad to say that he is back on his feet. He's doing an awesome job at Employees Only, but you can get this whole story of his life from his podcasts. He's had some of the best guests on there. He's had Christian Delpeche, who is possibly my favourite flair bartender of all time. Between him and Tim Flippy Morris, that is the kind of flair that I love to see. Really entertaining. He's had Christian on there as a guest. That is a superb podcast. If you're interested in your flair at all, I definitely recommend that you get that show and have a good listen to it. So check out the Steve Schneider Show podcast. I believe it's at Schneider Show on Facebook and Twitter. And do definitely check him out. Now, the latest bar-related podcast, it's not purely bartending, but if you've been watching the podcast with me for a while, you will have seen that Russell Davis from Bar Rescue featured on our podcast a little while ago. He was kind enough to do an interview with me as well, and it was one of my favourite podcasts that I've been able to do so far. He is the nicest guy. Had an absolute blast interviewing him for the Bartender HQ podcast, and now he has brought out his own podcast with Chef Brian Duffy, also from Bar Rescue. He's one of the awesome chefs that was in the show, And the two guys are doing a lot of, they're basically doing a weekly podcast about their travels around the world. These guys are like jet set bartenders and chefs. They're all over the place, they're always travelling, and they've got some amazing stories from the road. They've got some new projects going on as well. It's called the Road Rash Podcast. That's the Road Rash Podcast, and it's at Road Rash Pod on Twitter, and you should definitely check their show out. It's got some amazing content. These guys have been in the business forever. Russell is an ex-bartender of the year, and I mean, what these guys don't know about the bar industry is just not worth knowing. I've still got to try and convince these guys to hook me up with John Taffer so that we can hopefully, fingers crossed, get him on the show one of these days. It might be a little bit of a push, but it would be awesome. So definitely check out the Road Rash podcast. That is the latest one. I believe they're on about episode 4 or 5 now, and you should definitely check that out. So it's kind of a promoting everyone else's stuff kind of show this week. The only thing that I want to promote of my own is going to be the Central Flare series, which we've got coming up at Reflex Arcadian. That's the bar that I'm working at the moment. That's in Birmingham City Centre, about 5 minutes walk from the main railway station. It's going to be on the 1st of February, Monday nights, and it's going to be the first Monday of every month is when we're running this competition. It's nowhere near as big as Roadhouse. It's obviously, this is the first one, but it's building on the success of 5 years of Masters of Flair competitions. It's the West Midlands Flair Club that's running it alongside us, and we're talking to some sponsors this week. It's going to be awesome. So if you haven't checked it out yet, get onto the Bartender HQ website, check the main top menu, and click down to the Central Flare series. And you can see the full rules and how to enter if you're interested in coming to see us at the venue. So that's going to be it for this week's show, guys. It's not a huge show, but I wanted to touch base with you guys and check this out. I mean, I've not had a chance to get everything set up with the normal set, so I'm in my office today. But if you want to help us out with the show a little bit, I've talked about everyone else's podcasts, but if you can do me a favour, please follow us on Twitter. We are at Bartender HQ. You can also find us on Instagram at Bartender HQ Pics. You can find us on Facebook if you just search for Bartender HQ or the worldwide bartender community. And if you really want to help the show out, the biggest thing that you could do to help us out, it'll take you about 30 seconds. It won't cost you a penny. If you could go to iTunes, find our podcast on iTunes and leave us a review. You can leave up to 5 stars if you really enjoy this show. That would be absolutely great. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, just hit that thumbs up button, and it really helps us out because it gets more people to be able to see the show. And if you find anything on the show useful, then why not share it with a friend? So I'm trying to post a lot more at the moment, guys. Should be a post going up every day. I've posted a bunch of new recipes this week, and there's far more to come. So keep checking back to bartenderhq.com, and I will see you guys on the next show.